Welcome to the Promise Podcast, where we discuss how brands can deliver on their promise with a great customer experience and business impact. I'm your host, Harold Lamberts, and in each episode, I talk to business executives, thought leaders, and founders about how to achieve effective collaboration across departments, such as brand, marketing, product development, customer experience, and support, all with one goal in mind: a seamless customer journey with great business results. Okay, today we're talking to Patrick Quattlebaum, author of the fantastic book Orchestrating Experiences. Welcome, Patrick. Nice to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Glad to be here.
Great. Yeah, it's nice to finally meet you. I read your book years ago, and now to talk to you is nice to see we got connected down the road. Patrick, before we properly introduce you, we always start with one question: what is your favorite brand, and why? Why are you a fan or a loyal customer? What is it that they do that deliver on their promise?
Favorite's a tough one, right? The one that comes to mind is Etsy, which is I'm really fascinated as a practitioner in marketplaces, more complicated B2B to C, B2B platforms. But I really like Etsy because I think, now I've never sold on it, so you might ask somebody who's sold on it, their experience. But I think they do a really excellent job of creating that two-way communication and shopping and selling, and also amplifying smaller businesses against the larger conglomerates who are trying to sell you everything. So I like their mission of opening up lots of smaller, often artisan driven brands themselves, and then making those available. And then the communication between and collaboration when I'm buying something, if there's customizations of it, or just where is it incoming. There's most of the sellers on there have a nice touch with the people buying from them. So it always feels good.
So it's also a mission or purpose driven for a large extent that you really,
Yeah. So I've got some value alignment as a small business owner. I've got some practitioner interest, but then just as a consumer, it's always a great experience.
Yeah, no, it's great that brand loyalty can be driven by a number of different things. It can just be a seamless experience for convenience, but it can also be like that you really connect with the mission or the purpose or the principles of their business that really connect you to it. So I think it's always great to hear various different examples of why. Why is it that you're really excited about a specific brand? Cool. All right. Well, a good example. So let me properly introduce you. So Patrick Quattlebaum has been in the field of customer experience for over 25 years, if I counted correctly, from UX design into service design at Adaptive Path and Capital One. But you actually might know him as the author of the book Orchestrating Experiences, together with his co-author, Chris Risden. A classic book that I read years ago. So very excited to have Patrick on the show today. But last but not least, Patrick is also the CEO of Harmonic Design, a strategic design agency based in Atlanta. Welcome, Patrick.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
So that's my researched version of your career, but maybe you can add a little bit the perspective of, in a few minutes, like how did you get here? Yeah, from how did you get into the field? And maybe you can add some context to that journey that I just described.
Yeah, well, it's been a journey. And I think like many people in the field, we've all come from different areas, but maybe share some common interests that got us here. I guess the short version is I actually have a humanities background. So when I originally went to university, I have an English literature degree, and I thought I was going to be a professor teaching literature. But while I was in college, I started a business with my father. We had a soccer or football store, which I ran in college and a few years afterwards, which was really foundational. I think those two things, one, humanities, human-centered design became something that I got into later. And then running a service business, and working in all parts of it: marketing, buying, working with customers, accounting, all parts of the business. But during that time period, that's in the 90s when the web started to merge here. And I got kind of fascinated with just design, and also just with this emerging way of communicating and interacting with one another and companies. And so I made the hard decision to leave the family business. That's
Mhm.
maybe a whole nother book I could write. But yeah, followed my emerging passion with the graduate school in design here in Atlanta. And then I started out in user experience, ended up running about a 30 something person team within a consultancy, mainly focused on strategy. And by the late aughts, we were starting to do journey mapping and a lot of the things that we kind of take for granted now in practice. And some of the people that have worked for me went to Adaptive Path, and they lured me out there, which was a great decision. It was when the company was, very much known for user experience, but was starting to build a discipline in service design. And that's what attracted me to going there. I had a great experience there. And then we were acquired by Capital One. And so I was head of service design there, which mainly was evangelizing. And I worked a lot in England and Canada, bringing those approaches there. And I'm a consummate consultant, however, though I really love it. And so I wanted to go back into practice. I thought that I wanted to finish the book. Tris and I were really struggling to finish it because we're going through the acquisition, starting new roles.
I saw you started it in your time at.
Yeah, exactly. We started it right as we were getting acquired. So we were working on it. Took a little bit longer than us or Lee Rosenfeld, the publisher, probably wanted. And then so I said, yeah, I'll just go into individual practice. I'll finish the book. But then as soon as I left, an ex-client reached out to me and said, hey, I have a problem. And I'm working here with a person that ended up being my business partner for Harmonic. And it just became a company. And so, yeah, but and I still practice with clients. So while I'm leading our organization, I work a lot with clients and very deep into practice. And so I think of myself as really a practitioner at heart who is looking to just create opportunities for more people to do service design. At Harmonic, and also through the clients, we help organizations build their service design team.
Very cool.
And capabilities. So just want more people to have the experience of doing this type of design because it's so valuable.
Yeah, and it's always very. I find it always very satisfying to put your experience to work, and so to really see, and also teach younger talent, all the different angles of how you can approach things. So yeah. It's great, cool. And so interesting. You said Capital One acquired Adaptive Path. Just from a corporate perspective, like, why were they acquiring it? Was it really to buy the capability, or how what was really the driver for acquiring it? Do you remember?
Oh yeah. Well, as usual, there was a few different reasons, but one was that Capital One was and still is, but they were at the beginning of really understanding the role of design and reaching its objectives, and not just in creating better digital experiences and digital products and digital everything, because like a lot of banks and organizations are going through digital transformation. So they were investing a lot in product management and technology. So the design, they definitely understood that played a role there, but also Capital One, a lot of people know them for credit cards, but they have physical banks. They're in every different part of financial services. And it's a large system that needs to be designed and orchestrated, including physical branches and call centers. And so the service design as an approach made a lot of sense and was something that there were definitely people within the organization that were starting to bring that in and practicing it. It's not like they acquired us and the design org and said, oh, what's service design? They had really good people starting to do this. We just poured gasoline on the fire, basically.
I was going to say, but you don't hear that very often, that a corporate buys an agency but you're basically really then accelerating the capability building, right? It's like you say, okay,
exactly, and I can't remember the exact percentage, but 3 or 4x growth in design, not just because of Adaptive Path, but and they leveraged the external brand, the events. It really made people in the design community go, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And some really amazing talent was already there. And I think the acquisition of Adaptive Path helped attract more to the party. So yeah, it was a smart move, I think, on their part.
It was a great foresight as well from them to see that this is I mean, at that time, it was quite early days I mean, still a lot of corporations struggle with this understanding at the moment. So I think, what is it, 7 years ago, that was quite innovative.
10 years
And
ago,
yeah,
which
yeah,
is amazing. Yeah, yeah. It's been we just passed the 10 year. Brandon Shower, who was the CEO of Adaptive Path, noted it sometime last year. Was I think in the fall. 10 years. So yeah, that's when you were saying like,
that's
how
it.
long have I been doing this? Like, I can't even
I
believe it's
mean,
been 10 years to that. Yeah,
many companies had not even mapped the journey at that time. So yeah. So 8 years
yeah.
ago, you actually not wrote the book, but finished the book. I just heard that was also talking about great foresight. That was also, if I just flipped through it again yesterday evening, preparing for this podcast. I mean, that was also great foresight you guys had there, because almost all of the concepts in there are still super relevant today. If you also look at how journey management actually now is trending in organizations. I mean, how do you must also look at that with a smile.
I do. I actually, this right behind me, that yellow that's a very thin little thing that Adaptive Path that I helped write. I think we released it in 2012, maybe 13, but it's about mapping experiences, and
Oh,
it
yeah.
brings forward like the core practice of the difference between experience maps and journey maps, and the practice of going through that and why you do it and how you do it. And it's like 20 something pages, but it really got to the kernel. And Chris and I were teaching that. We were doing, workshops inside of companies, public ones, just around basic concepts of like ecosystems and journeys within them, and how that you use that to identify opportunities, and how those opportunities can be used to not just inspire point solutions, but how you can design a system of solutions that then make the journey better. And so as we were collaborating on that and kind of pushing this out and through Adaptive Path, we, we really started to see that there really was a foundational set of concepts that we wanted to get out there, that intentionally we didn't call it a service design book, although a lot of people have it on lists of service design, but we were pulling from CX and strategic design and service design and human-centered design, and some organizational design principles in there as well. So we were pulling from lots of different disciplines, and trying to bring it together around this concept, this kind of intentional double entendre of what orchestrating means. So on the one hand, there's the orchestrating of all the things that end up creating an experience for someone, right? But also the orchestration of people within an organization to work in new ways, co-creating with one another and people from outside the organization. And then the hard stuff of it's easy to get to a vision, but then how do you keep working together and manifest that as real change? And that's what the book really focused on. And the original outline, what Lou told us, was 3 books. So the way the book is structured is the first 9 chapters kind of get really to the heart of like vocabulary that we can get people speaking in the same language, and then these approaches of moving and understanding a journey, and then identifying and creating a vision. But then the last 2 chapters, really, each of those chapters could have been another book. So chapter 10 is Chris's real chapter of, now that you see that, how do you then drill in and make changes in implementation?
Operationalizing
and then
it.
operationalize it. And the last chapter is kind of where I focused in my practice, is the kind of the intersection of customer experience, design, and organizational dynamics. So like, how do you start to
More
create change and
transformational. Yeah.
change of ways of working in the organization? And it's easy to write all these things you could do, but the hard work is it's a long game of making this change.
But that's crucial though, because
Yeah.
the foundational methodology, of course, is important. It only starts to really pay off if you really operationalize it and organize around it. Because without that, it's just a great book. And but with that, it's really helping organizations execute it. Yeah. So I think that's really why I like the term orchestrating, because in the end, it can be fantastic. But if you don't know how to operate it in an organization, it doesn't really pay off, of course. And also one of the reasons why we call this podcast not a CX podcast, a promise podcast, is because we also want to take that to another levels. We also need that conversation between brands, product development, marketing, customer service, design, and because CX cannot be done by anyone alone, but only by
Yes.
collaboration between these disciplines. So that's really what we want to zoom in on, and that's why I think your book is so relevant. So I saw on your LinkedIn also something about the art of collaboration, and recently. And I used to say a designer who doesn't collaborate is not a designer, but an artist, because if they don't just want to work in isolation and, go make a painting. So I think it's really important to bring disciplines together to really design a service. So I think your book is also a testament to that, I think, if I read it again yesterday evening.
Yeah, and I've definitely seen that in, the since we wrote it, it's been very encouraging, one, to see more maturity and journey, just more journey work happening in organizations.
Sure.
And I think I think it went from over my career, I think it went from people from the outside doing it for organizations to happening more on the inside, but happening in almost like the teams you were just mentioning, like parallel worlds of different people mapping different views of what's happening. And now I think the next chapter is integrated practice, right? Which is, there's a lot that goes into it. I'm sure we'll talk about it, but I think that's the key, that this isn't owned by anybody really. And the same way that customer centricity really can't be owned by anybody. And so I think it's really about organizations, how they operate, and the integration of practice across the organization, because there's no one's a master in all the things that are required to do it well.
No, that's why I liked your analogy in your book. You mentioned the analogy of an orchestra, and that somebody's, of course, how do you say it? Orchestrating the orchestra. And everybody has playing a different instrument. Like every discipline has its role in the piece, basically, and in the experience that people get from it. So I think that's very much true. Also, and that's also why I think not attaching a service design or a CX label to it is crucial, because in the end, the journey is just the result, actually, of all the teams collaborate, and not a discipline in itself. I think. But that's, of course, important to involve all the disciplines in to really achieve that. Can you maybe name from your recent work, where do you see a lot of opportunity for these disciplines to collaborate more effectively? Is that from a brand strategy to CX, or is it from between marketing all the way to customer service horizontally, or like where do you see really big opportunities for disciplines to collaborate more effectively?
Yeah, there's definitely, the context of the organization is important. We work with all different types of organizations. A heavy amount of them would be enterprise, larger organizations. So, the digital transformation goal, right, is always kind of, I think, one of the big contextual things to keep in mind, right? So, and it's been changing in my career, and it's been slowly changing, and different organizations working through the tensions around when you start to move to more digital experiences, digital operations. How does that then tensions with what got that organization there? So if you were an organization like an Etsy or an Airbnb, et cetera, you were born digital in the last 10 to 15, 20 years. You have a DNA which a lot of those digital things that other organizations are trying to do, you kind of take for granted because you were kind of built that way. However, as soon as they went to scale, then they're facing the things that those legacy organizations, they're probably a little bit better at, right? So creating more predictable, efficient operations, right? Not the sweet spot for a lot of digital born companies as they scale. And I mention that tension because the groups then, depending on where you're coming from, if you're going from digital to scaling, or you're going from legacy organization to becoming digital, this tension between traditional practices within brand and marketing, ownership of the products and services that are core to the value proposition of the company, coming into tensions with digital, the product operating model of everything's a product, the design and its role with engineering and business. All of these things are kind of pressing up against one another. And well, how do we all work together? And who has the decision and the authority? And then when you bring journeys into that context and you're saying, okay, now how do we get customer centricity and journeys working within it? Then I think that the scale or level of Zoom that you're working at then is really important. So if you're working on, a smaller journey of like, hey, how does a customer resolve an issue? Very important thing. And you're trying to get, like customer service, maybe a CX team, the product organization, maybe legal. You're trying to get all these groups together and
Service delivery.
centering around the customers and viewing it as a journey versus a collection of processes, right? As you zoom out, though, I think you're really getting into strategy and really needing the alignment of, well, you don't just do journeys to quote unquote have a good customer experience. You do journeys because it's another way of seeing value streams, basically. And it allows you to go not just end to end, but also front to back and up and down. So you can tie it to what is our strategy and what are we trying to do as an organization, but then also get into the guts of how can we have it both ways? How can a customer have an experience that they would say that builds a relationship versus just a transaction, but also is efficient and predictable enough to deliver that you can do it at scale.
Yeah, so you mean a customer
yeah.
life? So at a customer life cycle, you mean, for example, so like the whole customer relationship and how you maybe cross-sell
Exactly.
and create customer loyalty over the years, and at the same time, on a micro level, more the operational efficiency and effectiveness of specific interactions, right? And then
right, and the kind of that middle part, which is the hard part, is, well, what are our priorities? How can we empower teams? So this coming more from the digital agility field, like small empowered teams moving quickly. However, where are they going? The journey is the thing that rallies them around a point of arrival for all of the work. And that's that messy middle of like intention to delivering and outcomes that I think journeys are stepping right into the middle of that. They're part of the solution, I think, to getting that to work better. However, that's why it's hard to get them working, because you're stepping right into the guts of how an organization makes decisions, what evidence or information different people believe inform those decisions.
And this is typically where the road mapping happens, like the road mapping
exactly.
of specific propositions, and then you need and then it cannot be a single disciplinary activity, because then you do need the marketing guys and the product owner and the designer or CX person and the operational responsible person to kind of align at that level, because otherwise it's just a bunch of initiatives and hoping that they add up to the strategic life cycle, basically. And
exactly. I think, the reality that there's only so much time, people, and money. And so, a classic example is, when going back to that call center example, say like resolving an issue, that there are different groups based off of strategy. So there may be a strategy of like, we need to reduce cost to serve, or we need to compete with other organizations. They are providing more digital self-service options. And so you end up with these teams working on, well, here's how AI can serve the customer. Here's how we can use texting. Here's how we're going to modernize the call center, and it's a collection of different, to your point, like collection of different efforts. But in the end, there's a strategy underneath the big strategy, which is, a basic example is, and the way we model it is, if someone's going through a macro journey and they have options, what options are we providing and why? And how much can we afford around here? And which ones are most critical to do first? And what if I need to switch channels? So there's an architectural strategy in the middle that is incredibly important. But the way and the journeys are a great way to see it and model it. What a lot of organizations do is skip that step. So they set the big strategy and they get everyone running towards it, and they're all implementing. And then to your point, it becomes a sum of its parts, and that can be extremely expensive. And that's how we'll talk to a lot of executives about it, is like, bottom line is you've got to be more intentional in what you're focused on, how you're spending your money, and is it creating outcomes, not outputs?
So the trick is then how can you, if you have a good strategic direction, like, hey, here's how we want to be differentiating from our competition, then you need to provide some guidance to the middle management teams on what themes are we actually prioritizing, so that you enable all those agile teams or journey teams or channel teams to make smart decisions that make sure that their prioritization make sure that they contribute to that.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, you use the word differentiation. I mean, where are we needing to differentiate and where are we not? And and this is one of the difficult things, and I've seen this a lot with AI, for example, which is, as with a lot of things, it reminds me a lot of 2007, 8, iPhone comes out, you start hearing mobile first, and it becomes kind of a hammer looking for a nail. And AI is very similar right now. And when I'm talking to our different clients, what they say that what's happening is you have to think of a lot of larger organizations. They're like their own little competitive marketplace. And so what people are learning is if they say Gen AI and they attach it to their business case, that they're getting funded more in many companies. And a lot of people who do design and engineering and product, they're feeling some career, maybe existentialism is too strong of a word, but they know it's a big shift and they've got to get hands on. And so there's also an individual driver happening of where are we using AI or not? Because I got to get familiar with it. That's going to look good in my portfolio, or that's going to make me move up in the organization. And that's none of that's customer centered. And so, bringing in journeys and other approaches like that as a healthy tension point to say, we've got to have some logic and tension to it. And then there's also some just hard decisions to make of not everything can be differentiated or the coolest thing or using AI. We have to be smarter in where we're investing, where we need to differentiate, where it's okay to just have it be good, right?
Yeah, I like the word.
And it,
I like the word intentional that you use, because then you're
Mhm.
saying, okay, we're going to differentiate on A, B, and C on these key moments in the journey, because that's what's really important to the customer. But we're going to
Yes.
streamline X, Y, and Z, because they're commodity. We can really focus on operational excellence and save costs there, because it's not going to make the difference. Yeah, it's hygiene. So, for example, but just
Yes.
deciding something like that is already a lot of guidance for an organization to work on these journeys and these roadmaps to make choices. Do we do A or B? So I think connecting that to the strategy but making it tangible enough for the teams to work with is then really the kind of like guidance they need, right? To say, okay, which efforts do we put on the roadmap and which do we maybe backload a little bit?
Yeah, and that's where that scale, what
Yeah,
level of Zoom are you
at a
at,
Zoom
is
level.
really
Yeah.
important. Is important because with one client that I've been working with for years, still making improvements at the lower levels of granularity of getting, they're in retail, omni-channel retail. So, how does the digital organization, store operations, call centers, brand marketing at these, say, middle to more granular journeys, how does that work, right? So if you're sitting in the digital organization and you're charged with designing 4 of the 7 moments that make the end-to-end experience work. Like, well, how do we work together? So there's a lot of work still to do there. And in a lot of retailers, if they're an older retailer, that's the challenge. There's a lot of power and legacy thinking within the brick and mortar stores, and you're trying to merge together these perspectives and disciplines. But at the higher level, I think what they've done an amazing job is that, and I maybe, thinking of like, where do you start with some of these approaches is, I think it was 6 or 7 years ago, I worked with them to model out just the big moments that happen at the highest level of kind of like the key journey and value proposition they provide. So it's like maybe 18 or 19 moments. But one of the really interesting things that they did with this, they used it in lots of different ways and very helpful, but they have a disruptor in their industry competing with them, and they just took those moments and benchmarked against the competition and understanding which ones are they uniquely trying to provide, which is not a lot of them because there are norms in shopping experiences. But then they could compare and say, oh, this is where we feel we're lagging. This is where we feel like we're at parity. This is where we think we're ahead of them. Here's where we're trying to differentiate. Here's where we're not going to. And then using it to drive strategic objectives and focus of maybe we focus on these 3 moments for the next 6 months or whatever. And that alone, that's kind of the top down use of these things, is moving beyond just the marketing and customer segments and things, and really thinking about how value is created in moments and how experience is material to that. It's not a wrapper, right? And then the other work is then how do you get more teams laddering down from that and working on specific end-to-end experiences that cut across product teams or channels or whatever, so that there's less friction and requires less customer effort and all those good things. Like, I think marrying those two is how you really get adoption in an organization. If you had one or the other, you might have a strategy without able to implement, or you may have a lot of people doing journeys, but it's not tying up to strategic decisions
And this
intention.
is I love that, because and I think this is
Yeah.
why journey management is also making that achievable, because
Yes.
without it, it's so difficult to say, okay, we've got this PowerPoint from the brand department, we got this digital strategy document from IT, and then how do you marry all that together? Yeah, like, it's really challenging. And then if you say, oh no, we map our journey on a customer life cycle and on a proposition journey, and we have the micro journeys of each channel interaction, for example, then you put some structure and hierarchy to that delegation of your strategy. Yeah. So, like, I think that can really help also people understand it, because I think with so many strategic guidance coming from different angles in different disciplines, it's so hard for implementation teams to make sense out of it. Yeah. So, like, I think really making it accessible and understandable, that they can actually execute it, because what happens a lot, I think, is it is so complicated that they just ignore it.
No, yeah. There's a tendency there's this tension of, you don't want to bury, say, a small team working on part of a system with the whole thing. Then they get overwhelmed. And then people will say, hey, but you're overcomplicating it. The opposite move, which I see a lot in product, is kind of in the pursuit of creating some simple solutions to design, interact with, etc. We ignore the complexity that is really around us, right? And so it's like, well, how do you manage that to give just enough so people can not be in a vacuum, but also be intentional and know how it connect. And like with a lot of our clients, of like just very simple things of like, if you're like I mentioned those 7 moments, it's like, well, that might be 4 different product teams plus store operators, et cetera. Can you at least look left and right in the journey? Like, I'm focusing on the middle, what's happening before and after, am I collaborating with those? Like, little simple techniques like that are incredibly powerful, like, versus just everyone running in their lanes as fast as they can towards a destination that they're not really sure how I often compare it to clients of like, it's like everyone's working on puzzle pieces, but we don't have the cover of the box, so people don't know. And so it feels really good to connect 2 or 3 pieces that you can control. But then when you zoom out, you just see that fragmented thing on the table going, what are we doing?
But at the same time, not everybody has to fully be busy with the cover. Yeah. So, like, it's also important that once you know how your piece contributes, it's also fine to be completely focused, as long as some entity is kind of taking care of.
I think it's required. Yeah, I don't think it's just fine. It's required to be focused, given the challenges that people are taking on, and the speed that is increasingly desired by leaders, that you have to be focused. But focus doesn't mean myopic, right? And so that's where these approaches, I think, really help.
This is a good. I want to pick up on the word leader that you put there, because I'm curious. Like, how many do you see an increase in leadership getting this? Like, do you see an increase in leadership seeing the value of approaching this from a journey management perspective, to say, okay, we need this to put some structure to the madness?
I do. I think that, it varies. In some cases, what I see is leaders getting it, and then maybe there's a tension with other leaders who,
of course,
if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Kind of what got us here is going to keep us there. Journeys would be just one example of that. I think there's the thing I noted earlier. I think there are, journeys everywhere. So I think you have pockets, and then some competition around who owns the journeys, and no, we're doing this over here. We've definitely run into that in some organizations. CX leaders, if they're building a coalition around this, they're tying that in with the digital transformation side of the house. I think is one of the hardest things, because some of the approaches to prioritization, intention, focus are different. It's not a different logic, but it's not. Meanwhile, in the digital product organizations, are creating a whole nother way to do this. And they're wanting the organization to adopt a product thinking, everything's a product mindset, where there's another group of people who are like, well, we're thinking things more from the customer and from journeys. And, as a service designer, that a lot of these products are just components, and not just, but they're components in a larger system, right? And so not everything is a product.
That's why I think it's quite successful to decouple it from ownership, because I think if you say this is not owned by CX standing on a soapbox, or product management for all of a sudden driving the agenda, but saying no, we all have our parts, and we have almost like a neutral way of working or transformational team who is not one or the other, but basically just bringing the disciplines together. That we see in some cases where it's also sponsored from a management level. We just speaking to a previous guest recently. And then of course it kind of like makes it less political and not owned by any of the disciplines, but rather a collective own. But of course it's not easy to get there. But I think there's definitely a role that service designers also can play by not owning the journey, but by actually bringing together these disciplines to create a collective sense of ownership.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about that in our practice. I agree. The ownership, the ownership thing is a trap. As is, I think when going back to your question, I think there is more of an understanding of these concepts. Now it's getting to, well, how do we do that? And on the one side, there's better tools and platforms that can make this manageable and scalable. That's good, but it's the ways of working and how does this not become more? And that's always a big challenge is like in organizations already feeling that I have enough time to do something, when something new like journey management, product management, anything is like, well, is that on top of what we're doing? And it's like, well, no, it's a shift in how we work. You said, okay, then what gets displaced? What aren't we doing?
Right.
And technology can help make some of it more efficient and scalable, where that becomes less of it's like, oh, we're creating efficiencies and how we're doing tons of work around quantitative and qualitative information. Now there's ways to make that more efficient, and that should be opening up time for new roles and approaches that are about intention and about orchestration and about, and those are the next value, the next set of valuable contributions to the organization that CX and design and things can play. But it means not doing some things or making other things more efficient to open up the space and time to do new things.
Yeah,
and that's where leaders really struggle. It's like, what is really going to have to change to adopt this at scale?
Yeah, I mean, we were chatting briefly before the session, but I think one of the things that when speaking to a board level or a director level, they, of course, always balance commercial excellence, operational excellence, and customer excellence. And that there's never one thing alone. They always have to balance those things. So I think if you bring all the disciplines together, but yet the content is only customer experience, then they also disengage. So I think it's also important to make sure, like, if we do a journey, it also covers the commercial opportunities, the operational opportunities, and the customer value opportunities, and then you balance them out collectively. And that I don't see happen enough. I think it's a too single-dimensional perspective on that.
I agree. And as journey management forms as a way of working and a capability, I think that's where, that's been an interest of myself and my team here at Harmonic is we really believe that the mindset and capabilities of service design are going to be really valuable for that, because that's what a service designer does, is all the things you just mentioned. We're not an expert in every one of those domains, but we understand how to design systems where all of those things work together by leveraging the different perspectives and talents of the broader team. And if journey management is only focused on a new way to measure and show where we need to make improvements, then then it's like quality control. And that's not the vision for customer centricity. It's not, hey, everybody, we could do better, right? It's meant to be integral to the design and implementation of things to reach these strategic objectives and create strong relationships with people we call customers, right? So that's, I think, the promise of journey management and why designers and service designers have to get really deep into it and contribute because
Yeah, I
I think
like
it's
that
badly
perspective.
needed.
I get it. The service designer is not the expert
Mm.
on most of these content wise, but is actually the main skill, and why they have a role to play in this is that they're really good at creating an overview and creating connections between the disciplines and making that visual so that these disciplines can actually break the language barriers and collaborate more effectively. So if you then decouple the ownership from the service designer and turn it into like a facilitator or orchestrator, if you will,
Yes,
then it can actually maybe lower the threshold for other disciplines to actively adopt this kind of way of working. So,
exactly.
so maybe that's a good advice already to our fellow service designers and practitioners. Is there anything else that you see that you would give as an advice to people in this field? Like, what should they really take home as take home value?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and I think there's different choices that designers can make in kind of where they want to focus in their career. I would say that the you need more designers who are and this is people we look to hire here, that are as interested in changing a process or a policy than a touch point. And so I think and there's lots of space in there for design craft and interest. So whether it's understanding more on the measurement and metrics and tying that to business strategy, I think that's a wonderful area. There's another one around the stuff we've been talking about, which is like the organizational dynamics and organizational design and how that comes together with how people work in order to get to creating these better outcomes. And then the other area would be there's this tying together of experience and operations, right? So kind of like looking at more of a more holistic formula for hard thing to do, but everyone can win. So we can design things that a customer has the experience, hopefully ends up having an experience that what we're knowing is directionally towards what they desire or need, but also the employees are so critical in
For sure.
one to a few degrees away from delivering those experiences, and then the realities of just operational decisions that kind of
And that's, I think,
choices. That's a rich area, and I think
yeah, I think just before the session we were chatting about this as well, and we say, okay, there's so much untapped potential also in just efficiency gains in the back office. Yeah, so and it's not just about creating a more higher conversion rate on the website, but also just being a lot more efficient in the back office can can be an enormous cost efficiency gain. Especially if budgets are tight and economy is tight, that's also where I think there can be a big potential for adding value to the company.
mm-hmm.
So I think that I like your point of designers not only being interested in improving a touch point, but also a process or a way of working. And I think that's it's always a combination of those three things. Cool. Patrick, we're almost wrapping up. Is there anyone you would recommend that we also bring on as a guest onto this show that we really should be speaking to?
Well, I mean, other than Chris Risden, who I wrote the book with, a person comes to mind that I've really admired her work. Actually, I have her book right here. You may have her on the list already. Carrie Bodine.
Yeah.
So she co-wrote Outside In, has her own consultancy. Originally, or at one point was a Forrester consultant, thought leader. And so this Outside In, I think, is like 9 years old. Concepts in it are still relevant, like a lot of these things. And she also has had a very big focus on journeys, has been involved in the service design network and gave talks at their conferences and stuff. So I feel like she's a a good connector in the design world and the CX world, as well
Sure.
as to business. So she's great.
No, I've just like yours. I've handed out her book to many clients as well. So as a nice inspiration for client organizations to take home. So thanks for that. Any final words that you want to give to the listeners that after talking about this topic today?
Well, if you're doing this work, keep at it. This is I think the good work. It is. I do think there is more understanding and appreciation of it. And so maybe some of the conceptual ice is breaking, but now we're getting to, I think, even the harder part, which is how does it really fit? How do you get traction? How do you really scale it? And by that, what I'm talking about is the really adoption of journeys as in my view, what could be a very powerful operating model. As opposed to other approaches that could be taken, that really would be ideally the common thing that people return to and dance and break apart and make change within organizations, is not losing sight of how people start somewhere and end somewhere, that we get to desired outcomes for everybody and try to do as best we can in between. And it's hard work, but if you're interested in these things, it needs more practitioners from lots of different disciplines to invent what this is going to be, because it's still early days. While a lot of us have been hoping and dreaming of this for a long time, the reality is in the arc of time, we're not.
No, and I like how you said, connecting it all from a end to end from a journey perspective, but also what we talked about earlier, connected strategically upstream and also connected operationally to the micro journeys. I think because that's also how you get your projects and initiatives approved by the management, and because then it ties into direct business value, if you will. So great conversation, Patrick. Thanks so much for elaborating on this. Keep up the good work at Harmonic, and who knows, maybe someday you'll write another book. Who knows?
Yes.
Thanks for inspiring the audience. Hope to see you again. So that was another episode of the Promise Podcast, where we discuss effective ways for brands to deliver on their promise with a great customer experience and business impact. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to like, subscribe, or leave a review. Check haroldlammers.com for more great content. Hope to see you again in the next episode. Until then, keep pushing to deliver on the promise.